Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our live walkthrough of the FCA's data request, which is due out today. It's great to see so many people on here, new faces, old faces, and I really hope you're going to get a lot out of today's webinar, because there's two ways of looking at this data request. You can see it as a chore, a bore, and a tick box exercise, or you can see it as an opportunity to improve your business. We're glasses half full people around here. So we're going to take the second option. And we genuinely believe this data request is an opportunity to learn more about your business and make some data-driven improvements. So while everybody in the team is going to talk about the nitty-gritty today and how to get this data request completed and back to the FCA, you're going to get something that you probably won't get anywhere else. And that's positivity, advice on how you can turn this into an opportunity and real insights, as I say, to improve the business. So without further ado, we're going to introduce our panelists. So first person we have on today is the Queen of Compliance, Mel from CATS. Mel, tell us a bit more about what CATS does.
Oh, what a great introduction. Yes, hi, I'm Melanie Holman from Compliance and Training Solutions, otherwise known as CATS. And we provide compliance support to financial planners throughout the UK.
Thank you, Mel. And then we have the powerhouse of practice management, Chris Bagent-Reid. Chris, tell us what you do at Jigsaw Tree.
Thanks, Phil, for that wonderful introduction again. So we help firms with all things technology. So whether it's selection, configuring, onboarding, training, outsourcing, all aspects of technology, just to make sure that their tech stack is working in a way that works really well for their business and creates that operational efficiency for them.
Thanks, Chris. And Ben, the guru of growth, and today, for one day only, the purveyor of polls. Ben, what's your role at Melo?
Thanks, Phil. So I'm Chief Innovation Officer at Melo. I'm basically in charge of mapping the future and then making sure all you guys know about it through effective marketing and comms.
Thanks, Ben. You've said that before, haven't you? And then finally, the Empress of Exits, Vicky Hicks.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending this morning. I am Victoria Hicks. I'm very, very fortunate to call myself the CEO of Melo, and we support business owners to build better businesses and, of course, to exit them at the right time in the right way to the right buyer. Thank you for having me here this morning.
Thanks, Vicky. I'm Phil, founder of the Yardstick Agency. So, few things to get out of the way before we dive into the data request. First thing, we'll be sending a recording of today's session out to everybody who registered. So even those people who registered but couldn't attend, everybody will get the recording. I'm afraid that we don't have time for questions today because we've got so much to pack in and to get through. But leave your questions in the Q&A, which you'll find in the bottom ribbon of your screen. And then our panelists will follow up separately after the webinar to answer each of your individual questions. And during the webinar today and the walkthrough, we're going to drill down into each of the 4 different sections. And during each section, when Mel, Chris and Vicky will give their views, at the end of each section, Ben is going to put up a poll. Would want everybody to answer that if you don't mind. And to get the ball rolling and test that the tech is working, Ben, we've got a first poll to go live with.
So what we found is very true in business is that no one can stand still. In business, you are either growing or you're on your way out and you are going. So we would like to get a flavour of who is on the call today. So I'm going to launch my poll now. And please, can you put down whether your business is growing on the ascendancy, or you're thinking about the other side and you are going, or if you're just not sure, there's a button for that as well. Perfect. So we have answers coming in. Looks like most people on the call so far are growing. Oh, wow. 82% of you are growing, in fact. Fantastic. 325, a few more to go. I think that's a pretty unanimous result there, guys. Most people here are growing. Over to you, Phil.
What's the final number, Ben?
The final, we've got 333 respondents out of 410. 82% said that they are growing.
4 out of 5. You're going to be busy, Ben, over the coming months and years. Right, let's dive in then. Let's dive in to the first section of the data request, and this is all about the people involved in delivering financial advice and financial planning to clients. And it's clear that the FCA is focusing on the issue created by female advisors and planners being in the minority when the ownership of assets, female ownership of assets, is on the rise. There was some research from Schroders back in 2021 that found that 60% of Britain's wealth will soon be in female hands, yet only 7% of advisors have a strategy for advising female clients. Then there's some other research from McKinsey that shows 70% of women who inherit wealth switch advisors within 1 year of their husband's death. So in this section, there's both a threat and an opportunity. Mel, can you start, please, by fleshing out a little bit more about why women in financial services workplaces, the focus is on this? Why is the FCA's focus on this?
Sure. So back in 2016, the FCA themselves as a body signed up to the Women in Finance Charter, which is all about how they as an organisation commit to diversity and inclusion within the working environment. And then in 2021, they published DP21-2, which was about diversity and inclusion in the financial sector, looking about how we can drive change and everything. And what they did is in 2022, they introduced for listed companies to be able to, they have to publish at the end of their financial year about whether they've met specific board diversity targets. So this subject about diversity and inclusion, etc., has been bumbling on for quite a while. What's happening now is that the focus is now shifting to us as personal investment firms. And Melo contacted the FCA directly ahead of this session today and asked them some very specific questions. And one of them was around asking these questions around women and women clients and the makeup of firms. And the FCA was super helpful by saying, look, we know what's coming our way, what the trends are happening about intergender and intergenerational wealth transfer. And they're saying, look, this is just a fact-finding exercise. Don't read into this too much, but we're just gathering the thoughts, what's happening, what's out there, and then it may drive policy going forward. But I won't go into a panic about this. Let's just tell the FCA what the facts are, and then we'll see what happens.
Thank you, Mel. Like that, not going into panic. It's always a good piece of advice when an email from the FCA lands, I reckon. Chris, you've been doing a real deep dive into some research on this and the gender gap.
Yeah, I mean, we enjoy looking at data. So there were a couple of articles that really resonated in terms of what they were telling us. So the FT Advisor did some research on the 20th of February this year. And what they showed was the number of female advisors grew by just 2% since 2022. And that the advisor population only has 18% females within it. So a very, very low number and growing incredibly slowly. So the regulator doesn't hold data by gender. So they ran this research by salutation, and of the 35,715 advisors, only 6,109 had a salutation of Miss, Mrs, Ms or Lady. And they excluded non-gender specific roles like director or doctor, but that was 1,209 individuals. So their view, according to this, is that the rate of females joining as an advisor is too slow, and that's why the regulator is paying particular interest here. But then in addition to that, HSBC put out an article on the 2nd of February this year, which outlined that high-earning women are closing the gender investment gap and that they are now saving and investing more than men. So some really interesting articles out there which just support what the regulator perhaps is looking for and why they're looking for that information.
So what opportunities, Vicky, come out of that data? The data, the research that Chris has been doing, and also the data that firms are going to be giving to the FCA?
Dealing with the gender advice gap isn't charity, it's strategy. And my view is, the more that we can empower women through, educating them about finance, providing this sort of support and guidance and advice, we're building a stronger and more resilient society as a result of that. And it does pose a great opportunity, as we've already highlighted, you know, if assets are moving, if we're seeing this sort of great asset shift, you know, from men over to females, be it through inheritance, be it through divorce cases, you know, et cetera, then what a great time to kind of look at the DNA of your business. And that's not just at the advisors that you have in the business today, but it's also looking at, you know, who else do you have in the firm that's on that development track, in the paraplanning roles, in the administration roles, or any other roles that you've got. Because I know how hard it is to find good female advisors. It's kind of on the list for most businesses that we speak to. So more and more firms are having to look internally and say, well, what can we do with our existing team? And are there people in there that are going to be able to move into this direction? Because women want to be dealt with, not exclusively, but quite often in a different type of way. You know, they value things maybe slightly differently. And that comes through in certain stats when the FCA run polls and questionnaires and stuff like that to understand what do men look for when they're looking for advice? What do women look for when they're looking for advice? And whilst there are some similarities, there are certainly areas around goals-based planning and education and things like that that are much more important to females than they are to men. And so as a business, it's looking at your DNA and understanding, are we in the right place here to be able to deal with this great asset transfer and take advantage of the opportunity that it presents?
Vicky, just going back to something you said a couple of minutes ago, what are the challenges that firms face when trying to recruit female advisors and female members of the support team?
I mean, first of all, we're not as common, right, in terms of in the advice community. So that's certainly a challenge. And, you know, I think where you are located can have a big difference. But I think what business owners or the leaders in businesses also need to consider is, are they putting themselves out there when they're trying to attract new talent in a way that is actually going to generate interest back from both males and females? And that could be through offering things like flexible working or understanding perhaps the different family dynamics that different people might face to actually be able to then attract the right audience in to the business.
Thanks. Good answer. Right. Ben, do you want to launch the poll, read out the question, then Mel, Chris and Vicky, you can give your answers, and then Ben, you can give the answers of our audience, please.
Perfect. Just before we launch the poll, I would like to give a special thank you to the FCA for their engagement on this. We reached out to them ahead of the survey. They gave us access for our exclusive Q&A, which we'll put out after the session today, where we can ask them what they're trying to achieve from this survey, and they gave some real candid answers. So thank you for that. Really, I think it's a real positive sign for our industry that there is this kind of level of engagement with the regulator, which, you know, I've been here for 20 odd years in financial services, and I've never seen them as so interested to know what we think as they are right now. But with that aside, I'm interested to know what you think. So let's launch our next question. Our question is, should the financial planning sector positively discriminate to increase the number of women in financial planning? I like to get a bit controversial. So with that said, I'm going to ask our panelists what they think. So who do you say is going first, Phil?
Mel can go first. We'll go Mel, Chris, and then Vicky. Yes
or no answer, Mel?
So it would seem that this is very black and white. I would say yes. But I think that it needs to be put into context. I'm not saying that you have to go out and have, you know, specific numbers to go out and recruit, but I think we should be making aims and position ourselves, like Vicky was saying, knowing about your dynamics, your DNA of your firm, how to encourage this happening. So it'll be a yes from me.
Thanks, Mel. Chris?
Definitely a yes from me. I think the word positivity or discriminate is the right thing. We have to distinguish why this sector is the right sector for women to join. And I think we should all be part of that movement.
Thanks, Chris. Vicky?
It's a yes from me. Nothing to add.
You don't get to escape, Phil. What do you think?
I'm going to go not sure, because I was spending my time prepping for this webinar, not thinking about the answers to the questions.
Okay, thanks everybody. And the answers from our poll are in. So we've got answers from most people. 61% of our audience think no, we should not positively discriminate. And the numbers are changing rapidly. About 22% think yes, we should, and around kind of 20% think not sure.
Thank
Very
you.
good. Thank you.
Just to deal with one question that came in earlier on from Ashley. You will get everybody who has registered for this session today will get a recording of it sent later out today. Yeah, so that will come out later on today. And Ashley asked that question, and I know a few other people are thinking it, so I thought we'd deal with it. Right, section 2 of the data request will be all about active clients. And we know that many business owners are knee-deep in the weeds of running their business, often advising clients themselves. So they don't have much time to work on their business. What's that saying? You spend all your time working in your business, not on your business. So the data request provides a really good opportunity to take a step back and understand how your business is performing, identify the opportunities to take advantage of, and manage some of the risks that might need to be addressed. One example of that is that opportunity and threat, the twin opportunity and threat of intergenerational planning. So, Mel, starting with you again, what more can you tell us specifically about the data request and potential red flags around vulnerability?
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, just to make it clear to the audience, we have seen sight of the draft questions. So we understand that everybody's going to get their questionnaire, starts going out today to firms. My understanding is that there may be a bit of fine tuning around some of the questions, but fundamentally, the questions we have seen today, and the basis of this session today, is around the questions that are being published and sent out. So, what is interesting, I thought, is that the questions are separated into 4 sections, and they're quite high level. I didn't, in terms of, it's not. There's only one question, for example, that's asking, what have you done about the retirement outcomes feedback that we published last year? But it hasn't gone into too much detail about, annual review meetings that we might have thought of, following their last review. They're not doing a deep dive into that. It's quite broad, I suppose. Couple of things to flag up, I suppose. The questions, there's one question there that asks around how many active clients have you got? Active is going to be clients that you are servicing. So any, legacy clients that you're not looking after, you would not be included within that parameter. It does say treat a couple, so a husband and wife, or as individual clients. So they are 2 separate clients. That's the same as any children, adult children that are over 18. They are a separate entity. They can complain in their own right. Trusts are also a separate entity. So just making sure that you put out that right data, really. It also asks about how advisors are being paid. That's quite interesting. So there's various options that says, that relates, do they get, is it PAYE plus variable of 75% plus, 50% plus, 25%, or is it just self-employed? So there's no option there, but there's no variable element. So if that's the case, then you want to be ticking, if there's not self-employed, you want to be going for employed with up to 25% variable element. I appreciate you haven't got the questions in front of you, but I'm just giving you a bit of a heads up how to interpret this data. There's also a tab, a guidance tab when you receive this Excel spreadsheet. This is how it's going to be sent over to you, and there's a tab there that gives you a bit of guidance there about, and you can give approximate figures there. One of the questions, of course, you wouldn't expect anything from the FCA without touch upon vulnerable clients and vulnerability. So it does ask about how have you identified any vulnerable clients, and have you made any adjustments as a result of identifying any vulnerable clients, which is fine. But it does say, have you identified any vulnerable clients? And it says no. And if that generates, if you click no, you haven't identified, then it generates another series of questions that says, have you got a policy in place, and what training have you given? So, it's a bit round. I think we're all savvy enough now about a vulnerable client that that you can have a vulnerable client as either permanent or transient. You should be doing a lot of studying and training on this with your team. I think that if you said that there's no vulnerable clients identified, I'm not saying that the FCA will go running in to give you a bit of a thematic review or anything, but it might be something that might just again, it's a data gathering exercise, to be fair. So they may be thinking, well, what firms have got no vulnerable clients? So I think their expectations would be that the firms are identifying it, but this is what the exercise is all about. What are firms recording?
Thank you, Mel. We've just had a few people asking about when they're going to get the survey. Am I right in saying, Mel, that people thought it was going to be yesterday? The FCA said it was going to be yesterday, and it's now going to be today?
Yeah, it's started going out today.
So keep an eye.
If you've received the email 4 weeks ago, then the FCA has said, giving you a heads up, we're sending out a questionnaire. It's coming out this week. You know, you will be getting it.
So keep an eye on your inbox.
Yeah, in your junk box. Yeah.
And it sounds, Mel, as though there is a lot of focus on vulnerability.
Mm.
Can I jump in quickly and ask Mel a follow-up question? Because we're now starting to see the rise of non-ongoing suitability review, ongoing service clients. How should they be dealt with now?
So because you're still receiving an ongoing advisor charge, they are an active client. Whether you're delivering the service is another matter, but you are taking an ongoing fee, so they're an active client.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Mel. Chris, in the correspondence that Melo had from the FCA, they were pained to point out that they've really tried to be mindful of a firm's time when completing the survey, and talked about how the survey had gone through multiple rounds of testing. But from your perspective, how easy is it for firms to get the information from their back office or practice management system? And then also on the point of vulnerability, how is that information surfaced in and highlighted in a back office system?
Okay, thanks, Phil. So the good news is there is more data and dashboard information available now than there ever has been. So that has been a significant improvement from a practice management perspective. However, pulling all the required data that the regulator wants is going to prove, I think, a little bit challenging depending on how the firms have recorded that information. So I'm going to look at a couple of elements, and I'm going to focus on IntelliFlow Office just because of their market share. And when looking at the number of active clients, there is within the business intelligence dashboard, they have a client data quality dashboard. And if you run that dashboard, there are filters at the top that allow you to search into particular areas. So you can look at something that they call their service status, which is the client service proposition. And then you can look at that data. It gives you all the raw data down the bottom, which you can then export. If there are any missing elements, you can update that and then re-import that into IntelliFlow Office. So that's great in terms of it gives you the ability to see where you're missing information and update it fairly easily. I think moving on to vulnerability, I think it's really interesting what the regulator is asking here, because they're not just asking about the number of vulnerable clients, but they want to know what service adjustments have been made as a result of those vulnerable clients. So in terms of how you can record it, there is a space. And again, for firms who use IO in the business intelligence dashboard, there is a client management dashboard. And within that, there you can search on something that says, is vulnerable? And then you've got the option yes, no, or blank. But if you want to see everything together, then you can run something called the client list for mail merge, and that gives you the service status and the vulnerability. And there's the notes box in there where you can specify how you've adjusted your service as a result of that client's vulnerability. The challenge that we see, and we've conducted hundreds of database assessments, is that firms aren't necessarily recording the vulnerability on their practice management. And when we have a conversation with them, it may be in an Excel spreadsheet, it could be saved on the fact find, which is stored as a PDF on their practice management. And that data is much, much harder to surface than if they recorded it appropriately in the first place. And what we're also going to be doing is we're pulling together a guide specific to IO to really help firms drive those data requirements out of the system.
Thanks, Chris, and apologies for the length of the question. You got a bit of a hospital pass there. That's the longest question anybody's going to get on this webinar today. Talking of questions, there's some really good questions coming in to the Q&A around vulnerability. And I'm assuming that Mel and Chris can answer those offline after the webinar. So keep your questions coming in about vulnerability, and Ben will pass those on to Mel and Chris for follow-up answers. So, Vicky, in this section about active clients,
yep.
Once the data request or while the data request is being completed, because there's huge value in this data, where are the opportunities?
It's value in this data for the business owners, you know, as much as it's value for the FCA. And just to pick up on what Mel was saying earlier on, you know, this is a fact find. People will take a look potentially at this survey and think it's relatively easy to complete. We're not going into the depth that we would expect. But potentially what will come from this is maybe the FCA looking more closely at certain areas. And so this is really an opportunity with the timeframes that are available here. You know, businesses have got somewhere between 8 and 12 weeks to provide this information, dependent on their size. This isn't just an opportunity to answer those questions, but it's an opportunity to absolutely grab hold of your data and start to understand your business through the eyes of accurate data that will give you clear MI upon which you can make really informed decisions for the future of your firm. So when we're working with businesses on the exit side of things, we always say to firms, unless you've got an absolute clarity around your data and therefore a buyer can have clarity around your data, like we need to pause and take a moment and pause for breath. What gathering this data does is it provides the opportunity to cleanse it as a starting point. But what it also provides is the ability to look at risks in your data and to look at opportunity in your data. So if you're thinking about your own future plans and maybe you're looking at exit in 5 years or 7 years' time, well, let's understand the new inflows of clients that we have coming into the business. Let's understand the breakdown of the age demographic of our firm, because obviously every year that goes by, we're all another year older, unless someone holds the elixir of life, which I will pay handsomely for, I might add. But, you know, it's that ability to look at your data and say, well, actually, is this going to have an impact on my final value? And picking up, Phil, on something you were saying earlier on as well around women. And I think you said like maybe 70% or so might look for a new advisor if they inherit wealth. Okay. That's a huge opportunity for business owners to look and understand, well, where are the assets at the moment? Do we have a proper relationship here with the spouse? Do we have relationships with the next generation so that we are safeguarding and protecting those assets and delivering advice at a family level rather than an individual level? So yeah, great opportunities for people to take a look. I think the other thing as well, just to mention, and sorry, I'm conscious of everybody's time, is there's been a lot of chat over the last few years, and rightly so, about understanding your target client and making sure you're delivering value to those clients. And this is a really good opportunity to break down and look at different groupings of clients within your organization, but also as well to look at what we would term as assets under influence, because quite often businesses might have a certain amount which applies to active clients. But actually, in taking a step back and reviewing the data, they might spot other opportunities in there that they're not taking commercial advantage of at the moment. And actually, they might now be in a position to do so. So there's a lot of power with understanding your MI and using it to help you make future decisions that will align with your future plans. Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Vicky. And there's a marketing angle there as well, because target audience, you can't market a business effectively until you understand a target audience. But I will not go down that rabbit hole right now. Chris, there's a lot of love coming in for your IO guide, so I can see that being really popular. Ben, over to the purveyor of polls.
Okay, so as Vicky just said, it is really important to understand your target market, and certainly we work with firms all the way across the industry, and we are seeing target markets change, and the minimum amount of investable assets that are required to take a client on seems to be creeping up. So while we've got you on the call, we thought we would ask you the question: what is the minimum level of investable assets you would want to take on a new client today? Wow, answers are flooding in.
Ben, should we go to Mel, Chris, and then Vicky for the answer here?
I think we should do.
Put yourselves in the shoes of an advisor. What do you think it is, Mel? Mel, you're on mute.
Sorry, between 100 and 299 I would go for.
Chris?
Well, I would say around 250 would be a reasonable number, so I'd agree with Mel.
Vicky?
I've seen businesses make all sorts of segments of clients profitable. It is ultimately about the service that you deliver and how tech enabled you are in some scenarios, you know. So again, I think it does vary, but typically let's talk about like a financial planning client. And at the moment, I suppose the average cost for delivering an advice, ongoing advice. So I would say that for the majority of firms I talk to, they're looking at, I was going to say 250 and above. That's not even an option.
Do you know what the audience said, everybody?
Yeah.
For the audience, we had 16% said no minimum, 10% said 50 to 100, 41% said 100 to 300, 20% 300 to 500, 9% 500 to a million, and just 3% or 12 people said 1 million plus.
Interesting. Thank you, Ben. Chris, before we go on to the next section, just a quick question for you, if that's okay. When should firms start thinking about when they're going to start completing this data request? Yeah. Should they, I can see a lot of people potentially leaving it for the last minute. Is it better just to start as soon as you get it in?
Absolutely. I think they have to start looking at the data, start running those reports, start seeing what missing data they may have, understand the process of what they need to do to get that data as clean as possible for the regulator, because it sounds to me like this is a precursor for something else, which will be really interesting.
Thank you, Chris. Right, section 3 of this data request. This is all about advice process and controls. And the FCA's focus here seems to be on the consistency of advice and the consistency of advice that businesses provide to clients, which serves largely as a proxy for quality control. And the firms the FCA seem to be focusing on are those where you have individual advisors seeing themselves within a business Seems to be the direction of travel. So Mel, talk to us a little bit more about how you see this section of the data request, and in particular, in-house propositions.
Sure. So this section asks things like, how do you ascertain a client's attitude to risk? Do you use your in-house questionnaire or an external one? Please provide details. How do you ascertain capacity for loss? It asks about what is your investment strategy? What is your investment approach? So they're looking at, for example, how firms choose the product providers that are recommended to clients. Are you vertically integrated, acting as a restricted advisor? Have you got your own centralized investment proposition? Do you use third-party research? If so, who is that? Or do you let individual advisors do their own research? And that's quite interesting, really. I don't come across this now more often than not, that you get rogue advisors going off doing their own thing. But every now and then you do get clusters, pots, I suppose, where advisors act as a business within a business, which of course then the danger there is that it's not aligned, that individual is not aligned to the firm's culture and their vision going through and their target client, for example. So why is that happening? How is that? What parameters and monitoring is involved in as part of that individual that maybe is in their own research? If the firm's premise is that we do our own research, what are the parameters around that? Now, the FCA don't actually do it they don't do more of a deep dive in that. All they're asking is the question is, do you have your own CIP? Do you do your own research? And they've kept it quite bland, but I wouldn't be surprised, depending on the results of that, whether there might be a bit more exploring thereafter. It's also interesting, I thought they asked questions around file reviews, how many file reviews are done, and that's both for initial advice and for ongoing advice. So for any firms that are not getting annual reviews being looked at, seen as maybe lower risk, don't need to do it because it's not initial advice, less fees, I suppose. And they're actually asking for that. Are we monitoring and tracking that? The other thing to pick up on, so the circling back to investment propositions, it does ask if you use any kind of discretionary investment manager. Don't forget a DIM, discretionary investment manager, does include your model portfolio services. Some firms seem to get a bit confused about that, but an MPS is a discretionary investment manager, and as part of your due diligence, you should be ascertaining whether you're acting as an agent as client or reliant on others. And the FCA asks this information within this questionnaire. So if you haven't found out, you need to get a bit of a wiggle on to find out, you know, with the providers you use. But that should already be on file. If you've got that all done, it's not going to be an issue for you. Yeah, so it's just quite interesting. Again, just fact finding.
Getting a wriggle on echoes Chris's point about starting as soon as you can, I guess. No, yeah. Chris, let's have a think about technology and how tech can give firms a single view of an advisor's activity.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting one. We ran a forum with a group of consolidators back in January 2023. And at that stage, their number one was they wanted the one source of truth from their advisor meetings. And so what we do is we help firms by giving them consistency across all activities, which includes the client engagement and the advice process. And by mapping those, we make sure that each firm has their own best practice view as to what that looks like. And of course, we configure that into the practice management. But here, what's more prevalent today is that AI is really coming into its own. We've reviewed 19 AI providers, 16 of which offer this whole transcription service, actionable insights. So that's a really clear way for advice firms to be able to evidence that they have consistency in that advice service, but that they take into account clients' individual attributes and requirements as part of that service. And by having those technologies now available, it just means that the evidence capture is far easier and the reporting should be made more simple.
Thanks, Chris. Chris, you and anybody else on the webinar, does anybody know if the questionnaire mentions, the data request mentions AI in any detail?
Not from what I saw. I don't think they did at all. Mel, did you see anything around AI, just in case I've missed it?
So the pre-questionnaire that we saw did have some questions around how firms are planning to use AI. So are they going to start integrating it into their processes, and how do they envision doing it, whether it's front office, middle office, or kind of back office side of things? Although I must reiterate, we haven't seen the final questionnaire. This was a pre-questionnaire we got. So the final one may be slightly different.
I wouldn't be surprised though if they're staying in though, because the FCA has got a real focus on firms using AI to get efficiencies in place and things like that. And again, they're investing a lot into AI and encouraging firms with their AI sandbox in this area. So I think that they want to see what the direction of travel is again.
And also we spoke to a firm who'd had a thematic review, and the information from the regulator was you are not recording your advisor meetings as clearly as you should. And as a result of that, they did implement meeting transcription software to help support that request from the regulator.
Thanks, guys. And absolutely, Jane, why not take advantage of AI to find out if AI is mentioned in the questionnaire? I think that's a very good use of AI. Vicky, in this section, advice, process and controls. What are the opportunities for a business? And you've said previously that a business that's easy to run is easy to sell.
Oh, well, there you go. You've taken it now, haven't you? Yeah, that is how I was going to start. I think from my experience sitting in the exit side or at the exit side of kind of the business life cycle, more often than not, or usually 90% of the time, right, advisors are paying so much sort of care and dedication to their clients, and the clients are feeling very well looked after. And that is clear from the persistency data that sits against businesses, you know, and the fact that they don't lose clients. But what I have found is that they've not been paying the same attention to their business and actually seeing the business as something that sits alongside the clients, right? And its own living, breathing entity that needs investment. Because if you get that operation right, then that's capable of doing so many more things to actually create this golden time that we're all looking for with clients, that the clients really value. So this is an opportunity, in my view, to really get hold of your business, to understand the operation that powers your business, to look at whether you can improve any efficiencies within your organization. Like, we're very fortunate in this profession, if you're a business owner, that you can create value through these businesses. And one of the stats I saw recently, which I found super interesting, was if you take all businesses across the UK, not financial planning firms, but you take all businesses across the UK, you average out what those businesses sell for based on the profit that they're generating and the accompanying multiple that would sit alongside that. In the financial planning space, we can build businesses that are on average worth double what other businesses in all of the sectors are worth. And so see investing now in your business as not a cost, but an investment. Because where you look to improve those operations, you're doing two things, right? You're managing the risk of your business because you've got much tighter controls around it. You're making sure you've got house views on things. You're making sure the business is ready to scale. We've got 82% of people on this webinar today that are looking to grow, right? So grabbing hold of the operations here is absolutely key for that. But having clarity around who you are as an organization, I think one of the things that comes up quite a lot when we move into due diligence with business owners that are looking to sell is it can be quite challenging when you have different advisors who are maybe doing different things. And this isn't clearly documented within the business. That can cause all sorts of issues around that consistency of advice. And I think this is a really good opportunity to look and say, well, are we demonstrating consistent outcomes here across our advisor community? So yeah, thank you, Phil.
And that's a great segue into the first of two poll questions we've got in this section. So Ben, do you want to read out the first poll question and then we'll reverse the order? Vicky, will go to you first for your answer, Chris, then Mel.
Okay, so we're a bit greedy in this section. We've got two poll questions. The first one is what Vicky's just covered, that consistency of model. So I would like to ask you, is the age of the self-employed financial planner in large businesses over? Is that a thing of the past? Vicky, what's your view?
Being in the exit space, I would say yes. It makes a business very challenging to sell. There are question marks around ownership of clients, around people potentially doing things in slightly different ways. And of course, from a profitability perspective, you know, when you kind of look at the typical splits that a self-employed advisor is receiving, now that governance and compliance and, you know, all of these areas are ramping up and the associated cost to support a self-employed advisor continues to rise, it might not just be impacting you in terms of your value at the end, but actually these advisors might not be as profitable as you think, or perhaps even not profitable at all. So that's my long way of saying yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. Chris, next. Oh, you're on mute, Chris.
Thanks, Ben. I think undoubtedly it is far more challenging. It's challenging to gain consistency through that advice process. So from my perspective, every firm has their own choice, but I would say yes, it probably is. And we need to make things more consistent and simpler.
Thanks, Chris. Mel?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that firms that have an employed advisor team face less challenges. There's more control. You know, for a self-employed advisor, they have to meet your own T&C scheme. You have to put parameters, and they have to follow them. But you sometimes get a bit more resistance as a result of a self-employed advisor, I think. So I think it is definitely going that way, where it's more PAYE advisors. Definitely.
Okay, well, let's go to our audience then. So 65% of you said yes, the age of the self-employed planner in larger firms is over. Only 9% of you said no, there's still life in the old dog yet. And 25% of you just weren't sure on the outcome. At the same time, I asked you a second question. and this was really just a bit controversial and for fun. Should financial planning firms who own their own investment solution be allowed to call themselves independent? I've got the audience's votes, but I'd like to go to our panel in the same order. Vicky?
Ah, God, this one's so hard.
Yes or no?
Oh, mate, I mean, there's 50 shades of grey in the old world of vertical integration, but God, I think the problem's the definitions. Oh, that's what we need to be working on. Because look, if we're going to be absolutely like clarity, independence should be, in my view, you know, we are independent, we are not owned, we have no bias, no ties, no restrictions. So I suppose I'm saying yes, aren't I? But it's hard.
Thank you. Chris, what's your view?
It's a challenging one, Ben, but again, I would say yes, they should be able to be allowed to call themselves independent.
Thank you. Mel?
Yeah, so this goes on to the wider conversation, I suppose, because you can have a panel, and as long as that's been looked at from the wider market and you filter down, and you can have that. And so having your own DIM proposition, as long as you can go off panel, so to speak, and go elsewhere, you can still call yourself independent. Does that happen in reality? That's a different question. So I suppose technically, yes. I think it comes to Vicky's point about definitions. Yeah, that's a bit of a contentious question, I suppose.
Yeah, we often find in the exit space, quite often when sellers come to us and they're from an independent background, one of the things that they'll say is, you know, we don't want to sell to a vertically integrated firm. It's sort of that definition is a little bit tarnished, but, you know, we encourage more questioning around actually, well, understanding what is in that their own DFM. You know, is there a breadth of solutions in there that actually could work for your clients? You know, some of them are very clear. It's like we're an active house and this is our portfolio range, whereas others might have passive and blended and active and income, and maybe more cost effective as well than the solution that you're already offering. But one of the questions I always encourage the sellers to ask when they have concerns is what percentage of the business's assets are in their owned proposition. You know, some of them might have 80, 90% in there. Some of them might only have 20 because they've got a real breadth in their centralized investment proposition. And actually, that's just one facet. And there's lots of other pieces of the jigsaw as well.
So the audience, I think, come back to the question around definitions is one for me. It's not quite, we need maybe better definitions about what class is independent or restricted. So we asked the question, should financial planning firms who own their own investment solutions be allowed to call themselves independent? 33% of the audience said yes, 43 said no, and 24 said not sure. So I think a better definition would make that decision a lot easier.
Thank you, Ben. Right, as we are closing in on 10 o'clock, let's go to section 4 of the data request. This is all about business models and future plans. And going back to what Ben said at the start of the webinar, businesses are growing or going. And the FCA is trying to understand supply and demand in the sector. There's research from Investec in 2024 that showed 49% of advisors plan to retire in the next 5 years. So if advisors and planners are retiring at a faster rate than new people are coming into the profession, and we already have an advice gap, clearly that gap is going to widen. So Mel, why does the FCA, I may have answered my own question here, but why does the FCA want to know about future plans of the businesses that it's asking to complete this survey?
So the questions that the FCA responded to following Melo's request to the FCA was super helpful, I think, in saying, look, we just want to see how the land lies. We want to use this data, which we're going to share the results of. So everybody who completes this, you'll go get the results, to then shape whether we can reduce further regulatory returns. They have been at pains to say that this is not another financial resilience questionnaire that was introduced in COVID and still lingering on with us. This is just a one-off exercise that they're just going to do data for. So they are. I think they're coming from a positive place. So they are looking to use this data to see how they can shape the handbook and the returns and the data they request going forward. The FCA are mindful already, of course, that the average age of financial advisors is around 57, 58, and that there's an advice gap already in place. I mean, and obviously they published a consultation paper yesterday about targeted advice and simplified advice and such like. So they know that we need to encourage more people as a whole to come into the financial services sector. Are we doing anything about it? You know, are we looking to attract and be proactive about attracting people into financial services and encourage them? How are we changing, or are we thinking of changing how we're delivering advice? So as you said, we've touched upon AI. It does ask about that, and it asks about, you know, are we going to be using, you know, apps and things like that to deliver advice? So they're trying to get a feel for what's the direction of travel that firms are thinking about going forward. It's not about, this question is not about catching people out. I would say this is not, you know, just be honest. This is not about, you know, you said the wrong answer, so we'll go honing you. You know, there might be a couple of red flags every now and then, don't get me wrong, but, you know, just be honest and just see it for what it is, which is a fact-finding exercise.
Thanks, Mel. I think that's a really sensible way of looking at this. Chris, from a business growth perspective, from data that you've seen, evidence you've seen working with your clients, what do you see in the intergenerational planning space? And how are firms attacking this problem for the benefit of their business and their, of course, of their clients?
I think there's a really good opportunity, and we are seeing quite a mixed bag in terms of firms and their approach to intergenerational planning. You know, the stats that we've talked about today are quite worrying, the average age of an advisor, the aging population of a client base, and therefore I think the impetus and the drive is for firms to have a much clearer strategy on how they're going to tackle that intergenerational wealth, and engage with the younger population. And I think Mel's mentioned, you know, apps and AI, you know, what is your digital engagement with that population, because they're more aligned to that type of engagement as opposed to traditional face-to-face advice. So in terms of what we see, we probably see quite a split in terms of firms that have a clear strategy and are really driving those family groupings and looking at what the data tells them, versus other firms that are still looking after that aging population. And I think there's an opportunity for them to reconsider their strategy and think about what they're doing. Thanks,
Chris. And Vicky, opportunities. As the saying goes, everybody exits in some way, shape or form. What are the opportunities here that come out of this section of the data request around business planning, continuity, etc.?
I think it is taking that moment to pause and actually think about your business plan. So when we take firms through the exit process, the first thing we do is we assess their exit readiness and we ask them a whole heap of questions. One of the questions we ask is, do you have a business plan in place at the moment? When was the last time it was updated? And quite often business owners don't, or they did have one, it's in a drawer somewhere, it's not been dusted off for the last 10 years. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier on, Phil. You get so involved in the business that it's sometimes hard to step out and look at the business from that helicopter view. In particular, when a lot of financial planning business owners are also delivering the advice, and there may be compliance oversight as well, and HR, and they're wearing all of these different hats. So, you know, as this is an opportunity to really say and think about quite deeply, what are my future plans here for this business? When am I looking to exit? And if I know what the end game looks like, then how do I work backwards from that? And through just going through a process like this, okay, and this survey, I suppose, giving people that opportunity to go through this process, it informs the decisions that you make in your business. So actually the decisions you're making aren't just quick decisions because there's a flash opportunity that's come your way or there's a fire over there that you've got to deal with. But actually everything is a lot more thought through, and decisions you make are either aligned or not aligned to what the future plan is for your business. I think it's also a really good opportunity to engage the team in actually what are you doing and where are you going as a firm. And a lot of the work that Ben and the progress team at Melo will do with businesses is help them to establish what is the plan here? What is our mission? What is our vision as a business? And how do we ensure then that every person that's on the bus with us, that they understand their role and their place in helping us to achieve the whole. So I think business owners should take this part a step further, right? It's very simple in the number of questions, what the FCA are asking for, right? And like Mel and Chris both highlighted, this is about their growth agenda. This is the fact that they recognize that there are a heap of people that need advice, and they want to understand the split between business owners that are looking to grow or that are looking to exit for that exact purpose. But I'm saying to business owners, go further than that, right? And actually ask these questions of yourself for your own purposes so that you can create ultimately the exit that you're looking to achieve. As with anything, time is your friend or your enemy. So actually giving yourself the opportunity to take a look at your business through a lens that maybe you wouldn't have done otherwise is going to put you in a much better position, in my view.
Sound advice. And again, another lovely segue into Ben's final poll.
So just before we jump into the poll, to carry on from what Vicky says, when we engage with firms who are looking to grow, most firms come to us saying that they think they've got an issue with technology. They're not using it well, or it's the wrong technology, or their processes are broken. And when we actually get under the bonnet of things, most firms don't have a plan. They act very tactically. So they'll see an opportunity and say, yeah, that seems good in isolation, but there's no thought of how does that impact the master plan. So that's a big part of the work that we do. But anyway, back into our last poll question. So to finish off today, we've talked a lot around how businesses will evolve, what has happened recently. I'd like to know your views. Will the sale value of financial planning firms go up, down, or stay the same over the next 2 years? What do you think? Up, down, stay the same, or if you truly have no idea, there's a button for that one as well. Let's go around our panel. Vicky, what do you think? You're probably quite well placed to answer this one.
Yes, this is definitely a tale of two halves. So for businesses that are operationally sound, that have highlighted their risk, that understand the opportunity, that have a strong leadership team, that don't really have too much key man risk, those business values are higher than we have ever seen, even in the mad flurry of private equity money between 2019 and 2021. Acquirers need to keep buying, and therefore their focus is on easy to integrate businesses that are operationally strong and give them the foundations to scale. At the other side of the spectrum, however, Ben, we are seeing business valuations fall, or some businesses actually not being able to sell at all. And that is because there is more and more competition as more firms come to market. Acquirers, some of them are having to slow down whilst they integrate themselves. And therefore their focus is much more on cultural alignment and on operational and compliance stability when they're looking at acquiring a firm. So for some businesses, it ain't great news, but for firms that have the time and the resource and the dedication to get their business into the right shape, values can be higher than we've ever seen before.
Comprehensive answer. Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you.
So that leaves very little time for Chris and Mel. Chris, what's your view? Up, down, stay the same? You're on mute again.
I think for me, again, it's about that advice firm. So how good is their tech stack? What does their data look like? What does that show in terms of that due diligence? Because I think we've heard that firms acquiring are having to do more detailed due diligence, particularly around consumer duty. So I think that may slow the sales process, but I think there's a great opportunity for firms that do it really well to really push up that value.
Thank you. And Mel?
I'd say no idea. I agree with everything you just said there, but in terms of price, no idea.
And our audience, 25% said up, 21% said down, 23% said stay the same, and 31% said no idea. So pretty even across the board.
Very good.
Thank you, Ben. Right, 60-second wrap up. We want to hear what you thought of today's webinar. So after the session, there's going to be a short poll coming out to you, short questionnaire. Please do complete it. We can only improve these sessions with some feedback from you. It'll only take a couple of minutes. really short compared to the data request that is coming your way later on today. Hopefully, you're feeling up for that data request. Some firms are going to give into those BMW moments of bitching, moaning and whining about the data request. Others will see it as a tick box exercise, but we really hope that the majority see it as an opportunity to take a step back, learn about their business and capitalize on their data-led opportunities. So it's up to you which camp you are in. Are you in camp 1, camp 2 or camp 3? Vicky, give us a final 30-second wrap up.
We're all looking to build a stronger, more resilient profession here, and a profession is only as strong as its component parts. But what we do have is we have a really exciting profession, right? Full of great friendships. And I just want to say thank you to the guys that have jumped on today. We all moved super quick on trying to get something out that we could deliver to the profession that we all care so, so greatly about. And let's just support one another. Let's raise the quality of these businesses, and let's absolutely take advantage of the huge opportunity that is ahead of us all. And thank you to the audience today for listening.
Thank you, Vicky. See you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thanks a lot.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.